You think you know how power looks. You think it looks like a $3,000 suit, a gleaming Rolex, and a table at the city's most exclusive restaurant. You're wrong. Sometimes, power looks like a tired old man in a rain-soaked coat, nursing a cup of tea while a table of bankers laughs in his face. In 2023, at one of Manhattan's most prestigious steakhouses, 3 Wall Street hotshots decided to torment a lonely Russian man because of his broken English. They thought he was nobody. They thought it was funny. But they didn't know who he was, and they certainly didn't expect Sarah Bennett, the quiet waitress filling their water glasses, to destroy their careers with a single sentence. This is the story of how arrogance met its match. The rain in New York City doesn't wash things clean, it just makes the grime slicker. It was a Tuesday night in November, the kind of night that seeps into your bones, when Sarah Bennett clocked in for her shift at the Gilded Oak. To the outside world, the Gilded Oak was a bastion of old money. It was the kind of place where the mahogany paneling was older than the Constitution, and the steak knives were heavy enough to be considered concealed weapons. To Sarah, however, it was just the place that was supposed to pay for her master's degree in Slavic linguistics at Columbia, if the tips were good. Sarah was 24, with tired eyes, and a uniform that was always clean but slightly too large, a hand-me-down from a waitress who had quit 3 months prior. She was invisible to most of the clientele. That was part of the job description. You fill the wine, you fold the napkin, and you disappear. At 7:15 p.m., the maître d', a man named Charles, who possessed the warmth of a chilled spoon, guided a man to table 4. Table 4 was the purgatory table, too close to the kitchen doors, drafty, and usually reserved for tourists who didn't know better. The man was an anomaly. In a sea of Italian wool and silk ties, he wore a heavy, shapeless grey raincoat that smelled faintly of damp wool and tobacco. Underneath, he wore a simple cable-knit sweater that had seen better decades. He was older, perhaps late 60s, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite and then left out in a storm. His hair was a shock of white iron, thinning but stiff. "Your table, sir," Charles said, his nose wrinkling slightly as he took the man's wet coat with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. "Spasibo," the man rumbled. His voice was a deep, gravelly bass, heavy with the weight of a thick accent. "Thank you." He sat heavily. He didn't look at the menu. He just stared out the rain-streaked window at the blurring lights of Fifth Avenue. Sarah approached the table with her notepad. She had learned early on that the rich were demanding, but the truly wealthy were often simple. It was the ones in the middle, the ones climbing the ladder, who gave you hell. She wasn't sure where this man fit in. He looked like a grandfather who had gotten lost on his way to the grocery store. "Good evening, sir," Sarah said softly. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" The man turned his gaze to her. His eyes were a piercing, icy blue, startlingly bright in his weathered face. "Tea," he said. "Black. No sugar. And maybe soup. Borscht if you have." Sarah smiled, a genuine small smile. "We don't have borscht on the menu, sir, but the chef makes a beet reduction soup that is very close. It's excellent." "Good. That is good." He nodded, dismissing her gently. "I am Dmitri. I'm Sarah." "Sarah," he tested the name, rolling the R slightly. "A good name. Princess." She blinked, surprised he knew the Hebrew meaning, or perhaps it was just a coincidence. She hurried off to the kitchen. For the next hour, Dmitri sat alone. He drank his tea. He ate his soup with a slow, mechanical precision. He didn't look at his phone. He didn't even seem to have one. He just sat, a statue of solitude, in a room buzzing with deals and gossip. Sarah checked on him frequently. Not because she expected a big tip. He looked like he might pay with exact change from a coin purse. But because he looked lonely. And Sarah, living in a shoebox apartment in Queens, studying dead languages and eating ramen 5 nights a week, knew exactly what loneliness felt like. "Is the soup okay, Dimitri?" she asked as she refilled his teapot. "It is adequate," he said, the corner of his mouth twitching upward. Not like Mother's, but warm. It was a peaceful Tuesday, until the wolves arrived. At 8:30 p.m., the atmosphere in the Gilded Oak shifted. The heavy oak doors swung open, and 3 men walked in, bringing with them a gust of cold wind and an overwhelming aura of entitlement. Leading the pack was Sterling Pierce. At 32, Sterling was a managing director at one of the aggressive hedge funds down on Wall Street, Vanguard Capital or Titan. Sarah couldn't remember which, but she knew the type. He was handsome in a shark-like way, with teeth that were too white and a tan that definitely didn't come from the New York sun. Flanking him were his lieutenants, Carter, a heavy-set man with a flushed face who laughed too loudly at everything Sterling said, and Preston, a thin, wire-rimmed, spectacled analyst who looked like he would sell his own grandmother for a promotion. They were high on a win. They had just closed a merger or gutted a company. The energy coming off them was frantic and aggressive. "Charles!" Sterling barked, not breaking his stride. "Table 1, now." Table 1 was the prime spot. Center of the room, distinct lighting, perfect view of the entire restaurant. It was the throne room. "Mr. Pierce," Charles said, slipping into his obsequious persona. "Right this way. We have the 82 Lafitte breathing for you." They sat down, loud and sprawling. They ordered rounds of scotch before looking at the menus. Their voices carried, cutting through the low murmur of the dining room like a buzzsaw. Sarah was assigned to table 1 as well. It was a punishment, really. Waitresses usually flipped a coin to avoid Sterling Pierce. He was a bad tipper, a touchy drunk, and he treated staff like furniture. "Water," Sterling snapped as Sarah approached. "And tell the chef I want the ribeye, but tell him not to burn it like last time. Rare. If it's medium rare, I send it back. Understand, sweetheart?" "Yes, Mr. Pierce. Rare." "Absolutely." Sarah kept her face neutral. As the night wore on, the scotch flowed. The volume at table 1 increased. They bragged about bonuses, about the kill they made in the market, about the summer homes in the Hamptons. It was around 9:15 p.m. when Sterling noticed table 4. Dimitri was still there. He had finished his soup and was now slowly eating a piece of dark rye bread, staring into space. To Sterling, drunk on expensive wine and his own ego, Dimitri was an eyesore, a blemish on the perfect painting of the Gilded Oak. "Hey, Carter," Sterling nudged his friend, pointing with his steak knife. "Check out the hobo in the corner." Carter turned, squinting. He let out a wet, snorting laugh. "What is this? A soup kitchen? How did Charles let him in?" "Maybe he's the janitor taking a break," Preston chimed in, desperate to be part of the joke. Sterling leaned back, loosening his tie. "He looks like a villain from a bad 80s movie. Look at that coat. I wouldn't wrap my dog in that." Sarah was pouring wine at the adjacent table, her back to them, but she heard every word. Her grip tightened on the bottle. She glanced at Dimitri. He gave no sign that he heard them, but his posture stiffened ever so slightly. Sterling, emboldened by the laughter of his peers, decided to turn it into a show. He raised his voice, pitching it just loud enough to carry across the room. "Hey, Boris!" Sterling shouted. Dimitri didn't turn. He continued to chew his bread. "I think he's deaf," Carter laughed. "Or maybe he doesn't speak American." "Hey, comrade!" Sterling tried again, louder. "The gulag is that way." He pointed toward the kitchen. A few other tables grew quiet. The tension in the room spiked. This was uncomfortable. This was bullying. But these were powerful men, and in New York, money usually bought the right to be cruel. Dmitri slowly turned his head. He looked at Sterling with those cold, blue eyes. There was no fear in them, just a profound, tired boredom. "You speak to me?" Dmitri asked. His voice was deep, rolling through the room like thunder. "Yeah, I speak to you," Sterling smirked. "I was wondering if you could afford that bread. Or are you waiting for us to leave so you can finish our scraps?" Carter and Preston exploded into laughter. Sterling looked around the room, inviting others to join in. Nobody did. Dmitri placed his bread down. "I pay for what I eat. You worry about your own plate, boy." The word boy hit Sterling like a slap. The smirk vanished. His face went red. "What did you call me?" Sterling stood up. He was tall, athletic, and used to intimidation. "You listen to me, you washed-up peasant. I spend more on this wine than you made in your entire life. You don't speak to me. You don't even look at me." "Sterling, sit down," Preston whispered, sensing they were causing a scene. "No," Sterling snapped. He looked at Dmitri, mocking his accent. "I pay for what I eat." Listen to that. It's like he's gargling marbles. Learn to speak English if you're going to eat in a civilized country. He turned to his friends. "It's pathetic. These people come here, clog up our city, and can't even string a sentence together without sounding like a dying tractor." That was the moment Sarah snapped. Sarah had been holding a tray of silverware. She set it down on a service station with a loud clatter that drew eyes. She walked over to table 1. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She needed this job. She needed the tips. But she also had a spine, and she had spent 4 years studying the very thing Sterling was mocking. She stopped right at the edge of Sterling's table. "Mr. Pierce," Sarah said. Her voice was shaking slightly. Then it steadied. It became cold. "I think you've had enough wine." Sterling looked at her, incredulous. "Excuse me?" "The help is talking now." "You're mocking his accent," Sarah said, her voice rising so the surrounding tables could hear. "But you're making a fool of yourself." "I'm making a fool of myself?" Sterling laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "He can't even speak English." "Actually," Sarah said, her mind snapping into academic mode, the adrenaline sharpening her focus, "he is speaking perfectly functional English. What you are hearing is a phonological transfer from his native syntax, specifically the velarization of the consonants and the lack of copula in the present tense." The table went silent. Sterling blinked. "What?" Sarah wasn't done. She turned to look at Dmitri, then back to Sterling. "You made fun of his gargling. That is a velar fricative. It's a sound that exists in over 40% of the world's languages, including German, Arabic, and Dutch. Just because your linguistic palette is limited to the noises you make on a trading floor doesn't make him unintelligent. It makes you uneducated." A pin could have dropped in the gilded oak. Sterling's face turned a shade of purple that clashed with the tablecloth. "You listen to me, you little—" "And furthermore," Sarah cut him off, stepping closer, "you called him a peasant. You assumed he's uneducated because of how he sounds. That is linguistic profiling. It's the last refuge of a small mind. This man speaks at least 2 languages. How many do you speak, Mr. Pierce, aside from profanity and entitlement?" From the back of the room, someone gasped. A woman at table 6 covered her mouth to hide a smile. Sterling looked like he was about to flip the table. "Get the manager! Now! I want her fired! I want her out on the street tonight!" Charles, the maitre d', rushed over, looking pale. "Mr. Pierce, I am so sorry." Sarah, step away immediately. She's fired! Sterling screamed, pointing a finger in Sarah's face. And him! Throw that trash out too! He pointed at Dimitri. I will handle this, sir, Charles stammered. He turned to Sarah. Sarah, go to the kitchen. Get your things. You're done. Sarah felt the tears pricking her eyes. The adrenaline was fading, leaving only the cold reality of unemployment. She had stood up for what was right, and now she wouldn't be able to pay rent. She nodded, swallowing hard. Fine. She turned to walk away. Wait. The voice came from table 4. It wasn't a rumble this time. It was a command. Dimitri stood up. He didn't look like a tired old man anymore. He stood to his full height, which was well over 6 feet. He buttoned his shabby grey coat with slow, deliberate movements. He walked toward table 1, his heavy boots thudding against the parquet floor. He stopped in front of Sterling Pierce. Sterling, who was 6'2", suddenly looked small. You want to fire her? Dimitri asked. Yeah, I'm firing her, Sterling sneered, though he took a half-step back. And I'm having you banned. Dimitri reached into his coat pocket. Carter and Preston flinched, perhaps expecting a weapon. Instead, Dimitri pulled out a phone. It wasn't a smartphone. It was an old, brick-like satellite phone. He dialed a number, holding the device to his ear, his eyes never leaving Sterling's face. Da, Dimitri said into the phone. It is Volkov. Sterling froze. The name hung in the air. Volkov? Preston whispered. Wait, not Dmitri Volkov. Dimitri ignored them. I am at the Gilded Oak on 55th. I am buying the building. Yes. Tonight. Call the owner. Tell him the offer is double whatever the market value is. Cash. But there is a condition. Dimitri paused, listening. The condition, Dimitri said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register, is that the lease for Vanguard Capital. Is it Vanguard? He looked at the logo on Sterling's vest. Yes. Their lease in the Volkov Tower. Terminate it. Tonight. Sterling's glass slipped from his hand. It hit the table, shattering, red wine bleeding across the white cloth like a gunshot wound. You can't, Sterling stammered. Our office is in the Volkov Tower. We have a 10-year lease. Dimitri closed the phone with a snap. Not anymore, Dimitri said. I own the building you work in, and as of 5 minutes from now, I will own the building you are eating in. He turned to Charles, the maître d', who looked ready to faint. The young lady, Dimitri pointed to Sarah. She is not fired. Everyone else is fired, unless she says otherwise. Dimitri looked back at Sterling, whose arrogance had drained away, leaving only naked terror. Now, Dimitri said, his accent thick and heavy, like a sledgehammer. Who is the peasant now, boy? The silence that followed Dmitri Volkov's question was heavier than the mahogany bar that anchored the room. Who is the peasant now, boy? Sterling Pierce stood frozen, his mouth slightly ajar, a droplet of red wine dripping from the edge of the table onto his Italian loafer. For a man who made his living on volatility, who thrived on the chaos of the trading floor, he was completely unmoored. The predator had become the prey, and the transition was so violent he couldn't process it. You're bluffing, Sterling whispered, though his voice lacked any real conviction. He looked around the room, seeking an ally, seeking someone to tell him this was a prank. He's bluffing, right? He's a crazy old man. Charles? Call the cops. Charles, the maître d', was vibrating with anxiety. He looked at Sterling, then at the imposing figure of Dimitri, and finally at the satellite phone resting on the tablecloth. Charles was a creature of survival. He knew the smell of old money, and he knew the smell of dangerous money. Dimitri smelled of the latter. Mr. Pierce, Charles said, his voice cracking. I I think you should lower your voice." "Don't tell me what to do," Sterling shrieked, the panic finally breaking through his veneer of cool. He whipped out his own phone, the latest model, sleek and fragile compared to Dimitri's brick. "I'm calling Harrison. I'm calling the CEO. You're done, Volkov. You think you can intimidate Vanguard Capital? We manage $40 billion in assets." Dimitri didn't move. He simply picked up his tea, which had likely gone cold, and took a sip. "Call him." Sterling's fingers fumbled as he dialed. He put it on speaker, wanting the whole room to hear Harrison destroy this imposter. The line rang once, twice. Then, a click. "Harrison!" Sterling barked. "You won't believe what's happening. I'm at the Gilded Oak. Some psychotic Russian guy is claiming he owns our building and is trying to kick me out of the restaurant. I need you to get legal on the line and—" "Sterling." The voice on the other end was cold. It wasn't the chummy tone Harrison usually used when they were discussing golf handicaps. It was the tone of an executioner. "Where are you right now?" "I told you, the Gilded Oak." "Get out," Harrison said. "What?" Sterling blinked. "Exactly. Tell this guy to—" "No, Sterling, you don't understand," Harrison interrupted, his voice rising in volume. "I just got a call from the managing partner of Volkov Industries in Zurich. Do you know who Dmitri Volkov is?" Sterling looked at the old man in the grey coat. Dmitri watched him with the impassive stare of a wolf watching a wounded deer. "He's nobody," Sterling stammered. "He is the majority shareholder of the consortium that owns the skyscraper we operate in," Harrison hissed. "He also just activated a bad faith clause in our commercial lease agreement. Something about conduct unbecoming of a tenant. Sterling, they are locking us out. Security is downstairs right now, putting padlocks on the elevators. The servers are being remotely disconnected." The color drained from Sterling's face so completely he looked like a wax figure. Carter and Preston, sitting across from him, slowly pushed their chairs back, distancing themselves from the blast radius. "Harrison, You just cost this firm its headquarters, Sterling," Harrison roared. "And the rumor is he's buying the debt on our leverage positions. If he calls those in, Vanguard is insolvent by morning. You are fired. Do not come to the office. Do not pass go. You are done." The line went dead. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't tense. It was final. Dmitri set his teacup down with a delicate clink. He turned his gaze to Charles. "Charles," Dmitri said pleasantly. "Yes. Yes, Mr. Volkov." Charles rushed forward, bowing so low he nearly head-butted the table. "I believe I own this establishment now. The paperwork is being faxed to the office in the back as we speak." I assume so, sir. If you say so, sir." "Good." Dmitri pointed a thick, calloused finger at the door. "Remove the trash." Charles didn't hesitate. He turned to Sterling, his face hardening. The deference was gone. "Mr. Pierce, Mr. Carter, Mr. Preston, please leave immediately." "You can't do this," Sterling whispered, his eyes wide and wet. "I haven't paid." "It's on the house," Dmitri rumbled. "Consider it a severance package." Sterling didn't move. He was in shock. It took the sous chef, a large man named Marco, who had been watching from the kitchen door with a meat cleaver still in hand, stepping into the dining room for the reality to sink in. Sterling Pierce, the Wolf of Wall Street, stood up on shaking legs. He didn't look at Sarah. He didn't look at his friends. He walked toward the door, his expensive shoes clicking on the floor, a dead man walking. Carter and Preston scurried after him like rats fleeing a sinking ship, leaving their unfinished scotch behind. When the heavy oak doors closed behind them, the entire restaurant exhaled. Then, slowly, applause started. It began with the table of tourists in the corner, then the couple by the window, and finally, the staff. It wasn't a raucous cheer. It was a respectful, rhythmic clapping. Justice had been served, and it tasted better than the ribeye. Dmitri didn't acknowledge the applause. He simply looked up at Sarah, who was still standing by the table, clutching her serving tray to her chest like a shield. Her hands were trembling. "Sarah," Dmitri said softly. "Yes, sir," she breathed. "My tea is cold," he said, "and I believe I promised to explain why a billionaire dresses like a, how did he say, a villain from an 80s movie?" Sarah let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. A nervous laugh escaped her lips. "Yes, I believe you did." "Sit," Dmitri gestured to the empty chair where Sterling had just been destroyed. "Please, sit." Sarah hesitated. In the strict hierarchy of high-end hospitality, sitting with a customer, let alone the new owner, was a cardinal sin. She looked at Charles. The maitre d' was busy wiping sweat from his forehead and barking orders at the bussers to clear table 1. He caught Sarah's eye and gave a frantic, jerky nod. "Do whatever he says." Sarah sat. The chair was still warm from Sterling's body, a lingering ghost of his entitlement, but she pushed that thought away. She was sitting across from Dmitri Volkov. Up close, the monster looked different. The harsh overhead lighting of the restaurant softened as Charles dimmed the house lights, perhaps instinctively trying to create a more intimate atmosphere for the new boss. Dmitri's face was a map of deep lines and weathered skin. It wasn't the face of a man who sat in boardrooms. It was the face of a man who had worked outside in biting winds. "I am sorry for the theatre," Dmitri said, his voice low. He reached for the bread basket, breaking off another piece of rye. "I dislike attention, but I dislike bullies more." You really bought the building?" Sarah asked, her voice quiet. "Just like that?" Dmitri shrugged, a heavy movement of his shoulders. "Money is a tool, Sarah, like a hammer. Sometimes you use it to build, sometimes you use it to break things that need breaking. Today, I broke a very small, very loud thing." He looked at her, his blue eyes piercing. "But you were the brave one. You had no hammer. You had only words. And you stood between the wolf and the old dog." "I couldn't let him talk to you like that," Sarah said, feeling the flush return to her cheeks. "It wasn't right. My father, he struggled with English when he first came to the States. People treated him like he was stupid because he couldn't conjugate a verb, but he was the smartest man I knew." Dmitri nodded slowly. "Linguistics. You study this?" "Yes. At Columbia. I'm doing my master's. And the explanation you gave him." Dmitri chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "The velarization, the fricatives. Was that true?" Sarah smiled sheepishly. "Mostly. I might have improvised the part about the phonological transfer just to confuse him. But the science is sound. Your accent isn't broken English. It's Russian overlaid on English. It has rules. It has structure." Dmitri leaned back, his expression darkening slightly. He touched the lapel of his worn grey coat. "You are wondering about the coat," he stated. "It wasn't a question. Well, yes. Everyone else here is wearing Armani and Tom Ford. You look like I just came from the shift change at the mine," Dmitri finished for her. "That is because in here," he tapped his chest, "I never left." He poured himself more tea, ignoring the fact that it was lukewarm. "I was born in Norilsk," he began. "Do you know it?" Sarah nodded. "Siberia. One of the northernmost cities in the world. Mining. Nickel and palladium. They call it the city of eternal winter." "Correct." "The black snow," Dmitri murmured. "I worked the mines when I was 14. My father worked the mines. We were not people to the state. We were units of labor. If you stopped working, You froze or you starved. There was no third option. He ran a hand over the rough wool of his sleeve. This coat, it is not exactly the same one, but it is the same style. Soviet issue. Wool and sorrow. When the Union fell, chaos came. I was lucky, or perhaps ruthless. I understood how to move metal when others were panicked. I bought shares from workers for vodka. I consolidated. I became what they call an oligarch. He said the word with distaste, as if it tasted like sour milk. I made billions, he continued. I moved to London, then Zurich, then here. I bought the suits. I bought the yachts. I tried to scrub the nickel dust from my skin. He paused, looking out the window at the rain. The reflection in the glass showed a lonely old man. My wife, Katya, he said, his voice softening to a whisper. She was the light. She did not care about the money. She loved the man who smelled of earth. She died 3 years ago. Cancer. All the money in the world. Billions of dollars. And I could not buy her one more day. Sarah felt a lump in her throat. The restaurant around them seemed to fade away. The day she died, Dmitri said, I was wearing a $3,000 suit. I was shouting at doctors in English, demanding, threatening. And I realized I had become just like them, just like that boy, Sterling, thinking I was a god because I had a credit card. He looked back at Sarah. After the funeral, I threw the suits away. I found this coat in a vintage shop in Brooklyn. It reminds me that I am Dmitri from Norilsk. It keeps the wolves away. The people who want my money, they do not look at me twice. They see a peasant. Only the people who see a human, they are the ones worth talking to. He gestured to her. You saw a human, Sarah. You did not know I was Volkov. You defended a peasant. I defended a person, Sarah corrected him gently. Yes. Dmitri smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. It was a warm, grandfatherly look. And for that, I owe you. You said you were studying. Trying to, Sarah sighed. Tuition is expensive. The rent in Queens is going up. I was actually going to ask for extra shifts next week, but... Well, now that you own the place, I don't know if the Gilded Oak will even stay open. Dmitri waved his hand dismissively. The restaurant will stay. I like the soup. But you will not be working extra shifts. Sarah's stomach dropped. Am I fired? I know I caused a scene. Fired? Dmitri laughed. No, you are promoted, but not here. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a business card. It was heavy, black, with gold embossing that simply said, Volkov. I have a foundation, Dmitri said. We do work in Eastern Europe, preserving languages, dialects that are dying out because of globalization. We need linguists. We need people who understand that how a person speaks is who they are. He slid the card across the table. I will pay for your masters, Dmitri said firmly. Full scholarship. And you will work for the foundation as a consultant. Your salary will be, let's say, triple what you make here carrying soup. Sarah stared at the card. It felt like she was looking at a winning lottery ticket. But better. This wasn't just money. It was a dream. I don't know what to say, Sarah stammered, tears welling up. Why? You don't even know me. I know enough, Dmitri said, standing up. He buttoned his coat. I know you have a spine, and I know you respect the dignity of others. Those are things you cannot teach in a university. He looked toward the kitchen. Now I must go. I have to sign papers to formalize the purchase of this building before the lawyers go to sleep. But Sarah? Yes, Mr. Volkov? If Mr. Pierce tries to come back... Dmitri's eyes flashed with that cold steel again. Tell him the peasant says hello." The morning after the incident at the Gilded Oak did not bring peace. It brought a hurricane. In the age of information, silence is a luxury that the wealthy cannot always afford. Sterling Pierce, having been humiliated, evicted, and fired within the span of 30 minutes, did not go home to reflect on his moral failings. He went to war. By 8 Tegitob Wednesday, the narrative had already begun to shift. Sterling, desperate to salvage his reputation before the news of his firing became official market gossip, had called in a favor with a college friend who produced a popular financial news segment on a major cable network. Sarah woke up in her cramped apartment in Queens to the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly. It was a text from Charles, the maitre d'. "Don't come in. Turn on the TV. Channel 4. She fumbled for the remote, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The screen flickered to life. There, sitting in a studio chair, looking somber and surprisingly sober, was Sterling Pierce. The chyron beneath him read, "Wall Street executive alleges discrimination and assault by Russian oligarch." It was terrifying, honestly, Sterling was saying to the sympathetic anchor. He wore a navy suit, his hair perfectly coiffed, the picture of a victimized professional. We were just having a business dinner, celebrating a merger that would have brought hundreds of jobs to the city. And this man, this volatile foreign billionaire, Dmitry Volkov, just snapped. He started screaming at us in Russian, throwing threats around. And when I tried to de-escalate, he had his staff, including a waitress who I believe he has a personal relationship with, physically remove us. Sarah gasped, dropping the remote. Personal relationship? He revoked our lease illegally, Sterling continued, his voice trembling with practiced emotion. It's a hostile takeover of American business interests. And this waitress, she insulted us, called us uneducated. It was a coordinated attack. I'm filing a lawsuit for defamation, wrongful termination, and emotional distress. We're asking for $50 million. The anchor nodded gravely. Shocking. It seems no one is safe from the whims of foreign money. Sarah felt the room spin. The joy of the previous night, the scholarship, the job offer, evaporated. She wasn't just a witness anymore. She was a co-conspirator in a $50 million lie. Her phone rang again. It wasn't Charles. It was a number she didn't recognize. "Hello?" she answered, her voice a squeak. "Sarah." The deep, gravelly voice was unmistakable. "Do not watch the television. It rots the brain." "Mr. Volkov," Sarah breathed. "He's lying. He's twisting everything. He said we have a relationship." "He is a drowning man climbing on the heads of others to breathe," Dmitry said calmly. "It is what rats do. Do not worry. Put on a nice dress, not a uniform. A car is waiting downstairs." "A car? Where are we going?" "To the Shark Tank," Dmitry said. "We are going to visit his lawyers." The law firm representing Sterling Pierce was located in a glass monolith in Midtown, ironically just a few blocks from the Volkov Tower. The conference room was vast, with a view of the Hudson River that cost more per hour than Sarah made in a year. On one side of the long marble table sat Sterling, looking smug. Flanking him were 3 lawyers in sharp suits, sharks in pinstripes. On the other side sat Dmitry, wearing the same shabby grey sweater, though he had left the coat in the lobby. Next to him was Sarah, wearing her best Sunday dress, clutching her purse so hard her knuckles were white. Standing behind Dmitry was a single man. His lawyer, a quiet, unassuming man named Mr. Abernathy, who looked more like a librarian than a litigator. Mr. Volkov, the lead lawyer for Sterling, a man with an oily, slick-back hairstyle, began. "We are prepared to go to trial. The optics here are terrible for you. A Russian tycoon bullying a young American financier. The jury will hate you. We have witnesses, Mr. Carter and Mr. Preston, who will corroborate Mr. Pierce's account that he was verbally abused and unjustly evicted." Sterling leaned forward, a sneer playing on his lips. "You messed with the wrong guy, Volkov. You might have money, but I have the media. I'm going to bury you, unless, of course, you settle. Reopen the lease, pay the $50 million, and fire her." He pointed a finger at Sarah, "and make her apologize publicly." Sarah shrank back, terrified. Dmitri didn't look at the lawyers. He looked at Sterling. He slowly reached into a plastic grocery bag he had brought with him, an absurd accessory in a billion-dollar meeting, and pulled out a thermos. He poured himself a cup of tea. "Mr. Abernathy," Dmitri said softly, "please play the movie." Mr. Abernathy nodded and placed a small tablet on the center of the table. He pressed play. The screen didn't show the restaurant. It showed the interior of a private dining room at the Gilded Oak from 3 months prior. Sterling's face went pale. On the screen, Sterling was sitting with 2 other men. Not Carter and Preston. These were older men, rivals of Vanguard Capital. The audio was crisp. "Look," the on-screen Sterling said, swirling a glass of wine. "I know Vanguard is about to announce the acquisition of the Techstar startup. The stock is going to jump 40% on Friday. But if I short the stock through a shell company on Thursday, and then leak a rumor that the deal is falling through, the stock tanks. I buy back in at the bottom, the deal goes through Monday, and we triple our money. Nobody tracks the shell company. It's in the Cayman Islands." The room went deathly silent. That wasn't just locker room talk. That was conspiracy to commit securities fraud and insider trading. It was a federal crime carrying a prison sentence of up to 20 years. "Where?" Sterling croaked. "Where did you get that?" Dmitri took a sip of tea. "I told you, boy. I bought the building. When I buy a building, I buy everything. The bricks, the mortar, the lease agreements, and the security system data. The previous owner, he was a paranoid man. He recorded everything in the private rooms. Liability protection." Dmitri turned to Sterling's lawyers. The sharks looked suddenly very uncomfortable. They were civil litigators. They wanted no part of a federal criminal defense case. "Now," Dmitri said, his voice dropping to that terrifyingly low register. "You have accused me of assault. You have accused Sarah of incompetence. You have slandered my name on national television." He pointed to the tablet. "I have not released this video to the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission. Yet, I thought perhaps we could make a trade." "Anything," Sterling's lead lawyer said instantly, cutting off his client. He began packing his briefcase. "We are dropping the suit. Immediately." "No," Dmitri said. "That is not the trade." He looked at Sterling. "You will go back on that television station. You will apologize. You will say you were drunk, you were confused, and that Sarah Bennett is the finest service professional in New York City. You will admit you lied." "I can't do that," Sterling whispered. "It will ruin my career." "Your career is already dead," Dmitri said coldly. "I am giving you a choice between unemployment and prison. Which do you prefer?" Sterling looked at the tablet, then at Sarah. The arrogance was gone, scraped away to reveal the cowardice underneath. "I'll do it," Sterling wept. Dmitri nodded. He stood up, taking his thermos. "Good. And Mr. Pierce?" "Yes?" "My accent," Dmitri said, pausing at the door. "It may be thick, but I think you understand me perfectly now." 2 years later, the autumn wind swept across the stone plaza of Columbia University, carrying with it the crisp scent of decaying leaves and the heavy weight of accomplishment. It was a day painted in shades of gold and crimson, a sharp contrast to the grey, rain-soaked Tuesday that had changed Sarah Bennet's life forever. Sarah stood amidst a sea of light blue gowns, adjusting the mortarboard cap on her head. The tassel tickled her cheek, a tangible reminder that she was no longer just a waitress, invisible to the world. She was Sarah Bennet, Master of Arts in Slavic linguistics, graduating with highest honors. As the ceremony dragged on, with speeches about future leaders and changing the world, Sarah's eyes scanned the crowd of parents, siblings, and partners. Her own parents, too frail to travel from Ohio, were watching via a shaky live stream on an iPad. But she wasn't alone. In the third row, surrounded by fathers in Brooks Brothers suits and mothers in designer silk, sat a figure that looked like he had been carved out of a different era. Dmitry Volkov sat rigidly upright in a metal folding chair. He wore the same heavy, shapeless grey wool coat he had worn that first night at the Gilded Oak. To the other families, he likely looked like a vagrant who had wandered in from the park. To Sarah, he looked like a king. He looked older now. The 2 years had eroded the granite of his face, leaving deep fissures of exhaustion. His skin was pale, almost translucent, like old parchment. But when Sarah's name was announced over the loudspeakers, Sarah Bennet, magna cum laude, Dmitry didn't just clap, he stood. It was a slow, painful movement, his joints protesting the effort. But he rose to his full, imposing height. He brought his large, calloused hands together in a slow, rhythmic applause that cut through the polite clapping of the crowd. He nodded once, a solemn gesture of respect between equals. After the ceremony, the campus dissolved into chaos, graduates throwing caps, families fighting for photo angles. Sarah found Dmitry waiting by a quiet bench near the philosophy building, away from the noise. He was staring at a squirrel burying a nut for the winter. "You did not trip," Dmitry observed as she approached. His voice, once a rolling thunder, was now a rasping whisper, like wind through dry grass. "I had a bet with myself. I lost." Sarah laughed, the sound bubbling up through her relief. "I practiced in the heels for a week, Dmitry. I wasn't going to let you down." "You could never," he said softly. He patted the space beside him. "Sit. The legs, they are not what they used to be." Sarah sat, careful not to wrinkle her gown. Up close, the decline was undeniable. The fire in his blue eyes was still there, but it was dimming, like a coal at the end of the night. He breathed with a heavy, wet rattle in his chest. "I have news," Sarah said, trying to keep her tone bright. "The Foundation Board emailed me this morning. They approved the expansion into the Carpathian region. They want me to lead the field team in Ukraine starting in the spring. I'm going to be documenting dialects that haven't been recorded since the 19th century. Dmitry smiled, a rare expression that softened the harsh lines of his mouth. "I know. I told them if they did not pick you, I would sell the building they work in and turn it into a beet farm." "Dmitry," Sarah scolded, though she squeezed his hand. His skin felt cold, dry. "You have to stop threatening people." "Why?" He shrugged, a ghost of his old arrogance surfacing. "It works. Diplomacy is for people with time. I do not have time." The air between them grew heavy. Sarah looked at him, really looked at him, and the joy of the graduation faded into a cold realization. "You're sick," she whispered. It wasn't a question. She had suspected it for months. The weight loss, the cancelled meetings, the shadow that seemed to follow him. "The engine is failing, Princess," Dmitry admitted, staring out at the falling leaves. Decades of breathing nickel dust in Norilsk. The doctors in Zurich. The doctors here. They have fancy names for it. Fibrosis. Failure. They want to cut, to pump me full of chemicals to buy a few more months. But I am not a machine to be repaired. He reached into the deep pocket of his wool coat. I am leaving tonight. Leaving. To the hospital. No. Home, Dmitri said. To Norilsk. To the snow. But it's freezing there. The pollution, the cold. It will kill you faster, Sarah protested, panic rising in her throat. It will kill me honestly, Dmitri said fiercely. Here, in this city of glass and money, I am a curiosity, a billionaire with a funny accent. There, I am just Dmitri. The cold keeps you sharp, Sarah. It strips away the lies. I want to die where the air smells like iron and ice, not disinfectant. He pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with red wax. He placed it in Sarah's hands. It felt heavy. What is this? The final lesson, Dmitri said. Do not open it yet. Wait until the first snow falls in New York. Promise me. Dmitri, I can't. Tears pricked her eyes, blurring the vision of the grey coat. I can't say goodbye like this. It is not goodbye, he said, standing up with a groan of effort. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip surprisingly strong for a moment. We are linguists, you and I. We know that words echo long after they are spoken. You corrected the world for me, Sarah. You gave an old man his dignity when the wolves tried to tear it away. Now go. Go do your work. Save the voices. He turned and walked away, his heavy boots crunching on the autumn leaves. He didn't look back. Sarah watched him go until the grey coat blended into the shadows of the trees, disappearing like a ghost into the fog. 3 months later, the call came on a Tuesday, exactly like the night they had met. It was Mr. Abernathy, Dimitri's lawyer. His voice was professional, clipped, but Sarah could hear the crack in the veneer. Miss Bennet, he said. Mr. Volkov passed away this morning. He was in his cabin outside Norilsk. He was sitting on the porch watching the sunrise. It was peaceful. Sarah didn't cry immediately. She felt a hollow ache, a vast, empty space where a mountain used to be. She walked to her window. Outside, the first flakes of the winter storm were beginning to drift down, blanketing Queens in white silence. Wait until the first snow falls. She retrieved the envelope from her desk drawer. Her hands trembled as she broke the red wax seal. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a handwritten letter, the penmanship jagged and forceful, as if carved into the paper. Sarah, if you are reading this, I am cold. That is good. The cold tells the truth. You think I gave you a scholarship because you defended me against the boy in the suit. That is only half true. I gave it to you because you reminded me of Katya. You have a fire. You listen to people not to reply, but to understand. You are now the director of the Volkov Foundation. The trust is fully funded. Do not waste the money on galas or champagne. Spend it on the villages. Spend it on the old women who are the last speakers of their tongues. Their words are worth more than my bank accounts. Also, I have left you a burden, or perhaps a gift. The second document is the deed to the building on 55th Street, the Gilded Oak. I bought it to destroy a man, but I kept it because of the soup. It is yours now, all of it. The mahogany, the wine cellar, the debt-free ownership. My only condition is this. Table 4 remains open. It is the peasant's table. If someone comes in who looks like they do not belong, who looks hungry or cold or lost, you feed them. You treat them like a king, because you never know who is wearing the disguise. Spasibo, Dmitri. Sarah lowered the letter, the tears finally coming hot and fast. She wasn't just a graduate. She wasn't just a waitress. She was the owner of one of Manhattan's most exclusive properties and the steward of a legacy. The following week. The memorial was private, held inside the main dining room of the Gilded Oak. The restaurant was closed to the public. The staff, including Charles and Marco the chef, stood in a semicircle around a portrait of Dimitri. He wasn't wearing a suit in the photo. He was wearing the grey coat, standing in the snow, unsmiling but with a glint of defiance in his eyes. After the speeches were done and the lawyers had left, Sarah stayed behind. She sat at table 4. She touched the wood where he had sat, remembering the way he broke the dark rye bread. The silence was broken by the sound of the front door opening. The wind howled outside, pushing the heavy oak door inward. A young couple stumbled in, shaking wet snow from their coats. They looked exhausted. Their clothes were cheap, threadbare. The man wore a jacket that was too thin for the weather, and the woman looked terrified, clutching a wet brochure for a hostel. Charles, looking weary from the emotional day, stepped forward automatically. "I'm terribly sorry," he began, his voice practiced and firm. "We are closed for a private event. You will have to leave." The couple shrank back. "Oh, we're sorry," the man stammered, his accent thick, perhaps Polish or Czech. "We saw the light. We just wanted tea. We are lost." Charles began to guide them to the door. "I understand, but as I said—" "Charles." The voice cut through the room. It wasn't loud, but it carried authority. Sarah stood up from table 4. She was wearing a simple black dress, but she stood with a posture that filled the room. "Miss Bennet?" Charles paused. "I was just escorting them out." "No," Sarah said. She walked across the floor, her heels clicking on the parquet. She stopped in front of the couple. They looked at her with wide, anxious eyes, expecting another rejection, expecting the world to tell them once again that they didn't belong. Sarah saw it. She saw the fear. She saw the dignity trying to survive under the embarrassment. She saw Dimitri. "We are not closed," Sarah said softly. She turned to Charles. "Charles, please take their coats, and tell Marco to heat up the beet reduction soup. The good batch." Charles hesitated for only a fraction of a second. He looked at Sarah, then at the portrait of Dimitri on the mantel, and finally at the shivering couple. A genuine smile broke across his face. "Right away, Miss Bennet," Charles said. Sarah turned back to the couple, gesturing toward the best table in the house. Table 1, the table where Sterling Pierce had once sat. "Please sit," she said warmly. "You must be freezing." "We cannot pay much," the woman whispered, ashamed. "It is on the house," Sarah replied. "Tonight you are my guests." As they sat, bewildered by their luck, Sarah pulled out her notepad. She wasn't taking their order. She sat down opposite them, leaning in with genuine curiosity. "Now?" Sarah asked, her pen hovering over the paper, her eyes bright with the legacy she was carrying forward. "I noticed your accent. It's beautiful. Is that a specific dialect from Silesia? Please tell me about it." Outside, the snow continued to fall on New York City, covering the grime and the gold alike. But inside the Gilded Oak it was warm, and for the first time in a long time, everyone was speaking the same language. Sometimes, the greatest inheritance isn't money. It's a mission. Sarah Bennet went from serving tables to owning the building, not because she was ruthless, but because she was kind. Dmitri Volkov taught us that you can wrap a king in a peasant's coat, and you can wrap a fool in a designer suit. But eventually, the truth always comes out. We live in a world that loves to judge the book by its cover. But maybe, just maybe, if we stopped mocking the accents we don't understand, we might learn something that could change our lives. What do you think? Was justice served for Sterling Pierce? And what would you do if you were in Sarah's shoes? Would you keep table 4 open? Let me know in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe. It helps us share more stories about the hidden heroes among us. Thank you for watching, and remember, be careful who you mock. You never know who they might be.